traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and their contributions to our community. We offer this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of Canada. What I have learned from Indigenous people is that our relationship to the land should be one of stewardship rather than ownership, and I'm honored to make this journey with them. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, I would like to take a moment and welcome our two new board members, Councillor Doug Craig and Ms. Karen Quigley-Hobbs. And yes, we now have 3 Karens on the board. I'm going to start with Ms. Quigley-Hobbs. She has 20 years of experience working with regional government and public health. As a public health nurse and senior leader at the region of Waterloo, she has worked with and partnered with many community groups and organizations to address the needs at both system, group, and individual levels. And she's worked as a case manager for individuals and families struggling with mental health illness, as well as being instrumental to the development of the consumption and treatment service in Kitchener. So Karen, welcome, and you bring a wealth of experience. Councillor Doug Craig also brings a wealth of experience. He has lived in Waterloo region since 1974 and spent 32 years as a teacher for the Waterloo Board of Education before retiring. He also has extensive experience in local politics, serving as a ward councillor, a hydro commissioner, and regional councillor. In 2000, he was named mayor of Cambridge and held that position for 18 years. So welcome, Doug and Karen. You're great additions to our bench strength, and this is a very strong skill set and very committed board to the welfare of the community as well as the Waterloo Regional Police Service. Because a couple of members have other obligations, we are going to move up the budget discussion, which is 11.5 in your on your agenda, and that is starts at page 215. And Chief, would you like to kick this off?
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Yes, thank you. Happy to advance this item for the sake of moving things around. I will just launch the budget presentation in a moment. Do we have a view of the presentation in its proper form? Okay, thank you. I'm very happy to bring back to the board our draft 2023 operating capital budget for orientation to our new members and also those members of the public and the community that may be joining the conversation midstream. I'm happy just to provide some background and context in terms of what our proposal is today in December, and also a bridge to January's conversation as well. Traditionally, we save some of the the story to be told towards the latter portion of moving towards approval of the board and also towards regional council. But I will provide just some backdrop information for crime statistics and that we're experiencing locally on a national comparison level. So the total crime severity index that we're experiencing currently and over the past couple of years is driven from Statistics Canada data that looks at violent and non-violent index measures, which are offenses that are drivers for the total crime severity index rate. And we've experienced in the past 3 years an increase in Waterloo region, mostly driven by increases in crimes such as break-and-enters, thefts over $5,000, and so on. And so we've seen an increase in this index that is greater than the big 12 police services in Ontario, which provides some comparison for how we experienced the impacts of crime in our community. Also revisiting for our audience members, just the violent crime severity index. Again, Statistics Canada data that shows that Waterloo region has experienced an increase in violent crime, mostly related to index measures such as homicides, sexual assaults, robberies, threats, and so on. And we stand above the Big 12 police services in Ontario as well on this measure. And then the last point of comparison as well is just highlight our staffing levels in comparison to our own history and commensurate to growth within our region on a comparative basis. So currently our current staffing for officer to population ratio stands at 127.1 officers per 100,000 citizens. And historically, this is amongst the lowest growth or lowest rate that we've seen in our about 20-year history. In 2003, we're at a rate of 129.9 officers per 100,000. And we're currently falling below the national, provincial, and Big 12 rates per officer per population ratio. Contained in this package as well is some complementary data, which speaks to our staffing, workload, and crime issues in the consent agenda, which supplements and provides further details regarding this data. Finally, just for further context, we continue to see these trends continue in 2022. So on this slide contains some metrics for year-to-date statistics of where we stand on measures of violent crime. So moving around the circle, starting at the top, we've seen an increase in shootings in our region. The discharge of firearms and the commission of an offense is at 21 versus 16 in last year. We've seen a rise in offenses involving weapons. Within our reporting and in the media, we've seen incidents of stabbings, of weapons offenses that continue to be of concern to us in the community. We continue to see impaired driving charges escalating, despite our efforts for education, enforcement, and all of our efforts along those fronts. We continue to see impaired driving remaining a sustained issue within our region on our roadways. And the far right column speaks to our robberies. So we've had significant increases in robberies within 2022 versus 2021. We've almost seen the double of pharmacy robberies within our region, as well as the person-on-person robberies, significant increases over last year. And the total robberies year to date are almost up 41% versus this same time of last year. One key statistic that was released just this week by Statistics Canada showed nationally firearms-related offenses that on a total have gone down by about 5% nationally. But within our region, our census metropolitan area of Kitchener, Cambridge, and Waterloo, we've seen a 24.2% increase in offenses involving firearms of violent crime. So beyond the numbers, and there will be more context and more storytelling about how this impacts our members and our communities in next month's presentation. But I just want to signify that each one of these numbers represents a crime scene, represents an interaction between individuals that is violent, involves victims, victimization, and witnesses, an impact on neighborhoods, families, and individuals, and also our officers as well, impacting the fabric of our society and our community. And we look forward to elaborating on some of these impacts for Waterloo Region moving forward. I'm happy now to turn over the floor to our Director of Finance and Assets, Kirsten Hand, that will walk you through a preview of our current budget position and proposal for 2023.
Good morning. As a recap, just some of the budget drivers for our base budget for the operating budget. We did see annualization impacts of the 35 sworn officers approved through the 2022 budget process. That did impact our 2023 budget by an additional $4 million. We also saw benefit cost increases, namely WSIB through presumptive legislation, health and dental and retiree benefit costs. We continue to see contractual increases through our collective agreement, so cost of living to salary rates, as well as phased in frontline premium rates. We did slightly decrease our salary vacancy target from 2 million to 1.5 million. We also removed the one-time reserve contributions that were assumed in our 2022 budget, and that was pulling from the prior year operating budget surplus as well as from the benefit stabilization reserve. We continue to increase our capital reserve contributions to ensure that we're not relying upon debt for our capital program, and we also continue to see inflationary impacts, namely on gasoline. Next slide, please. From a capital perspective, not much change from the view that we provided last month. The only changes that occurred was as we reviewed our 2022 results, we did move some capital money from 2022 into 2023 as a carry forward. So that did increase 2023. As well as there was a minor adjustment for in-car video of about 162K, which we'll further explain through our modernization report today. The 2023 capital budget request is sitting at $31 million. The majority of it relates to our facility-related projects, followed up by IT projects and fleet replacement, etc. Next slide, please. So the board had provided direction last month that we provide additional scenarios and also more explain what our community needs from our police service. So within the report today, you'll see 6 different scenarios of different assumptions of what FTEs from a sworn officer perspective would be added within 2023. To basically have a level playing field, we did assume 55 officers from a 3-year perspective. So for instance, in scenario 1, when we assume 8 officers are added in 2023, the remainder to get to 55 officers were added in 2024 and 2025. And one of the reasons why we chose the 55 number was not only that it represents what we would need to bring us up to equivalent levels of our average, the average Big 12 police services, but as well, that will be better explained later. There was a review internally that's looking at what resources do we need internally to support frontline policing. So as you'll see, it provides a 3-year view of what the operating budget increase would look like. In addition, in 2023, it also explains what would be that percentage change in property taxes of that WRPS component. The only item that changed from last month as well was assessment growth was increased to 1.99%, but WRPS continues to be approximately 1/3 of the regional property tax levy, and that's been consistent for a number of years throughout our financial budgeting processes. So I'll turn it over to the chief to go into greater details in terms of the scenarios as to what that means in terms of resourcing internally to meet the needs of our community.
Thanks, Kirsten. So I'm just going to walk through each scenario just to provide at a high level where we plan to invest, should there be further investments. And I just want to highlight that last year in the 2022 budget, although the availability of the funding came to us late in this year, we have been seeking to grow for the authorized complement that was added last year. And so we're slowly seeking to add complement to frontline patrol, our expansion of our emergency response unit, cybercrime, major crime, which handles our homicides and shootings, and also break-in or auto theft and robbery. So those investments are currently planned as we onboard all available staffing from a recruitment standpoint. The scenario 1 and as a bridge to scenario 2 speak to what would a growth investment be from a population investment standpoint. So as the regional population has grown for the past 2 years at a rate of 1%, we just wanted to provide some context to all audiences to understand that the addition of 8 officers would be commensurate to that growth within our region. And then scenario 2 would speak to further investments in frontline patrol just to keep pace with the community's growth. And the 11 officers in scenario 2 speak to the last 9 years where we've seen a 1.4% population growth within our region. Moving along to our recommended investments in projected budgetary ask. Scenario 3 speaks to what we feel is a balanced and responsible approach to meeting the needs of our service calls, our investigations, and our violent crime increases today, allowing us to grow at a balanced perspective. So scenario 3 speaks to what we would anticipate to be further investments in frontline patrol, and also further investments in our special victims unit, which addresses sexual assaults, senior support, and also human trafficking. And we also continue to see a continued and sustained level of intimate partner violence offenses. So our investigations year over year continue to rise. Homicides within our region this year have been mostly family violence or intimate partner violence related. And these statistics, the work of these units between the victims and intimate partner violence actually drive a lot of our key metrics related to those charts that I showed you at the beginning, our total and our violent crime severity index. So these are necessary investments to keep pace with the growth of our region, and also the frontline patrol investments signified in most of the scenarios are our frontline resources that respond to all of those dramatic calls for service, the robberies, the break and enters, the violent assaults, the shootings, the stabbings, and so on. They are the front line that provides an avenue to solve a crime in the moment within the current day or days, and they are a bridge to all our investigative units. Scenario 4 speaks to a proposed expansion as we seek to bridge the gap in our service levels, that would see us adding further enhancements to rural deployment and also urban core policing initiatives that would allow us more visibility beyond what we have today, and also investments in our general investigations unit that continues to bear a heavy caseload related to stabbings, sudden deaths, especially related to the opioid crisis. Scenario 5 would see us invest further supplementing our intimate partner violence unit to try and get ahead of the curve of just response to actually proactive measures that would allow us to see early intervention approaches to dealing with intimate partner violence that we know can provide a capability for solutions for families and individuals. Scenario 5 also speaks to additional unmet needs in our internet child exploitation unit. Year over year, we continue to see a growth in, as we recall, we would call the second neighborhood, the explosion of online exploitation cases that continue to grow. And happy to elaborate on those unmet needs in child exploitation and sextortation cases and so on. Scenario 5 also envisions further investments in our direct action response team, which is our mobile team that addresses intense crime and community needs in all of our neighborhood policing opportunities. And scenario 6 would speak to the full actualization of our needs today, which would be the addition of 55 officers, which would allow us to supplement areas such as drugs and firearms, our major crime unit that could then take on all shootings to provide a consistent and measured authoritative response to gun crime in our community, and also additional supplements to frontline patrol. On each of these scenarios, we've highlighted some key statistics of interest that just give a snapshot into some of the drivers for our operations. So just going back to the scenarios before you, to be quite clear, from the chief standpoint and from our senior leadership team standpoint, we're very much alive to the tough economic climate that we face as a region, the role that we play in society in instilling and ensuring community safety to all of our partners, and providing a level of safety that is meeting the needs of our citizens and our robust region. And all of these statistics contained in this package, even in the consent agenda, speaks to pressures of growth, pressures of some needs that have not been met in terms of crime response. And we look forward to elaborating on those scenarios further. I would characterize our current model of response as mainly a reactive response model right now. As a community, we're sometimes thriving in our incredible operations and meeting their investigative and frontline needs, but at times we are behind the 8 ball in keeping up with the pace of growth and the activity carrying through our region. In terms of providing adequate and effective service to the community, our ultimate recommendation from the scenarios before you is that we believe a balanced and measured recommendation would be to grow through scenario 3 in 2023, which would see the addition of 19 officers to our current complement. And as mentioned, we are still striving to meet the authorized strength that was provided to us last year, but we're also looking at this as a multi-year plan to try to meet the needs of growth and operations within our region. And the recommendation from us today is that we believe that a growth of approximately 19 officers over the next 3 years which bridge that gap of what we're characterizing right now as a 55 to meet a bare minimum of operational needs to address the issues that are before you today in terms of violent crime response and core operations. Look forward to providing some additional context to this discussion in the coming year. We've highlighted in this report at a very high level that we have charged KPMG to provide an independent assessment of our staffing workload issues. They have done stakeholder analysis and consultation with stakeholders across our region to try and meet the needs. And I can say as a preview that report that will be available to the board and the community in the new year does reinforce the unmet needs and the pressing needs in our community from a growth perspective. So happy to highlight any of the discussion points raised to this point, and that concludes the formal part of this presentation. And I very much imagine that we'll have a robust dialogue about the issues at hand. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Lots of information and succinct and well presented, I would tell you. Does the board have any questions? Sandy, go ahead.
Thank you. A couple of questions. Budget's always a tough time, and I understand just pressures that you're under. I wonder, we saw statistics to compare our, I think it was the sworn officers to the Big 12. Do we have anything that shows the total complement of staff compared to the Big 12, just for a more complete picture?
Chief, is that a chief question?
I believe so. I'd have to go back through the MBN Canada package, which is actually within this current package, because it's a great question, Mayor Shantz, that actually speaks to the total number of WRPS members. So I know that year over year, we've actually been ahead of the curve when it comes to, we're slightly above on the civilian front, compared to some of our, comparable services, which does play into, I believe, our commitment to efficiencies and finding, innovative ways to deliver service, not always, focusing on frontline officers or, sworn officers. So we can seek to provide that, for you and for the board, if not immediately, but through the course of this meeting or today.
I think that would be helpful, because it is part of the whole picture, and I know we've been pretty innovative in how we've managed our staffing over time. And could I have another question, Chair?
You may.
Thank you. This is about rural patrol and visibility, and I think and my memory might be a little bit skewed, because maybe I remember what I want to remember, but I believe we talked about the increase 35 that we put in last year as allowing for a little more of that visibility. How does that play into this new increase that we're looking at in the next 3 years? Because I think you said that was once we got up to 44 members, that the increase would sort of kick in then. And I realize that's just sort of an illustration, but I'm just wondering how that comes together.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. From a high level, I can say that whenever we've referenced adding, frontline patrol, it's adding layers to our current base. So within the next month, this, KPMG report, the purpose of it was to look at our zone alignment and actually how we deploy within boundaries. So not only our geographical boundaries within the big cities, but also within the rural footprint as well. And there are recommendations surrounding the rural footprint. And we've had discussions before with this board about the bricks and mortar opportunities, that have existed and also that are before us today to look at how do we deploy. So some of that will come into focus in the next month as we comb through the recommendations, then ultimately come back to the board to say, here's the recommendations before us on how we might seek to deploy, especially in the rural footprint. It's tricky, as you know, as a governor in the rural settings, is visibility means a lot to all citizens there. And where we've tried to find the balance point is our calls for service demands are mostly within, the large urban centers. That being said, within our rural settings, we also see the highest proportionate in negative outcomes when it comes to, say, fatal motor vehicle collisions, high impact collisions, and so on. So from a traffic enforcement standpoint, we also have data within this package as well that speaks to our ability to meet call for service demands and emergency response demands within the rural settings. So we're trying to optimize our rural response that is balanced within the total regional footprint. And I might ask Deputy Hilton if you have any further indication beyond what I discussed, how we might seek to deploy in the rural setting versus what we have now as a bridge to the New Year's report from KPMG.
Chief, I think you actually hit all of the highlights in terms of what we may be doing, but I think, just to reinforce what you're saying in terms of response to calls, definitely the visibility is huge. And we know when people feel safe, they, that sense of feeling safe, that they are safe. But the bigger impact would be around some of our road safety planning. And so it's equitable across the region as well in terms of our road safety, in terms of looking at the Fatal Four, which is not only a national campaign, it's what we do all of our focus as it relates to road safety. And there's, I've mentioned this before as well, there's always opportunity outside of bricks and mortar about looking at different solutions, more mobile solutions in terms of our visibility footprint as well. So that's hopefully something for the future.
Sandy, any further questions?
No, that's good. Thank you. And I do appreciate some of the efforts that have been made, particularly in the last months, to increase visibility in the rural areas. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Ian, go ahead.
Well, thank you. And through you, Chair Redmond, just a couple of comments and then a question, I think mostly for the chief. Interesting to see the crime severity index and the staffing levels of the Big 12. I think those are important, I guess, building blocks. But the important part of what I heard in the presentation was the issues that affect Waterloo Region residents. So, mental health cases and the importance of our impact team, frontline staffing, which we know we're short on, staffing those critical things that you mentioned: intimate partner violence, sexual assault, guns, gangs, B&Es, cyber, and we have big city issues now. So I do think it's the important part that I get most value from is those things that affect Waterloo Region. So, individuals, businesses, everyone in the community needs to feel safe and be safe. So I'm more conscious of the narrative where you talked about, if we had more officers, here's what we would do with them. So here's I guess my question to you: you're recommending scenario 3, not because it gets up the whole way, but it is a continued down payment on getting the service up to the staffing level that we require as a community to deliver on all those pieces that you've highlighted in terms of where we are not, where we could do more if we had more officers. So option 3 is it builds on last year. And I think one of the pieces that I think concerns me is we weren't able to fill those 35 officers fully last year for a variety of reasons, and it's a tough scenario to do that. But building on that 35, the additional officers, you're saying option 3, you think that it's a stretch, but we can get there to get those officers up and running. And I presume there'll be some measures that the board will get over the course of the year saying, here's how we're doing. Here's the things we're doing to achieve that, because that's the important part. And I want to be clear that, I hate to look to next year's budget before we got through this one, but next year it will be, and here's the further refinement and enhancements we need to do to get there. Because I don't want to leave anyone the impression that if we do option 3 versus option 4, 5, or 6, that we're done. It's a point in time. We know that part of this is that there's some makeup, if you will, of from previous years. So I guess that's my question to you is, can we achieve, if we choose option 3, or if that's where we end up going, can we, there's a reasonable path to getting there, to get those officers on board? And then, next year we will have a similar conversation around, here's the further enhancements in terms of staffing that are required to fulfill our role as a police services board, both to the service and more importantly to the community.
Yeah, thank you for the comments and the question. Ultimately, contained within the report gives us a preview of, we're heading into a period over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years of low attrition. So we're not anticipating a significant exodus of officers tied to planned retirements and resignations, which will allow us an avenue, if I can describe, is to play catch up. I will not shy away from saying this will be a tall order for us to catch up from the authorized complement that was provided last year, and then also that we're seeking this year. But when we look at the total acquisition time on finding the right people to fill these jobs, and by the time we get them in the door through contract, through training, and then hitting the road as viable officers, we're looking at a minimum of 18 months to see those officers, on their own, independently operating when it comes to that total cycle of training and field development. Not to say that they aren't hitting the ground through that period as well. So you are correct. This is from our standpoint a multi-year plan that we feel that we need to bridge a gap of growth. That if I use the numbers that are before us, that even a growth of 19 officers per year over the next 3 years would bridge us closer to the gap that we've identified today, and that we feel that we'll continue to see as the region continues to grow.
Thank you very much. Tony, go ahead.
Through your Madam Chair, thank you. If I could be afforded just 2 questions, if that's okay. The first one is, and I think it's springboarding off of my colleagues, Councillor Shantz and Ian McLean. As we look at the various scenarios, you're talking about how you would implement those FTEs in various areas, be it intimate partner violence, frontline patrols, etc. And as I look at it, I just want to make sure for clarity that no one misunderstands this. As we look at it, when you get up to the urban and rural presence, and in scenario number 6, we talk about major crimes or drugs and firearms. With the backdrop of what we've seen in previous reports of crimes and how these crimes are increasing, what you're not saying is that we're going to compromise with any one of your preferences. We're not going to compromise our focus or our commitment in addressing these various aspects or concerns within our community. I think I know the answer, but I just want to make sure, because people could misinterpret what they see and say, oh, well, we're not going to address drugs and firearms unless we get number 6, or we're not going to address the urban and rural presence unless we get number 4. So maybe if you could clarify that first point, just.
Yeah, no, you said it very well. To try to revisit the phrasing that I used before, is this is a continued layering on highly functional teams right now that are grappling with these issues. So imagining, that all roads start at the frontline patrol, that, springboards into action to address, those high profile incidents and are just a regular churn of calls for service. But the layering of growth would add additional strength to already existing teams. And we're always seeking to optimize and to prioritize, on a basis that is, what's the highest impact on victimization, the highest impact on the community's wellness, really. And so when we're talking about issues about robberies, break and enters, shootings, stabbings, and all these issues that, that we're seeing the continued rise, you're correct. We're solely focused on those as our highest priorities now. And then how do we keep up and move from a reactive model that we have right now to hopefully looking at our best crime suppression measures, which is focusing on the prioritization of offenses and also offenders as well. You know, we've seen some other jurisdictions have great success in targeting, you know, the most prolific offenders and offenses. And so to allow ourselves that capacity, I know that Deputy Hilton and her team of teams, you know, are solely focused on crime suppression and all the measures that we can take to address these issues that we're facing today.
Okay, I appreciate that. And my second comment or question, maybe we can see it in January's report, if possible, is with the hiring of these additional FTEs, some strategy. I think Ian McLean had mentioned it. It would be nice to see some strategies with some KPIs or metrics on, so that we can see how we're doing relative to the plan, right? So we're not going to end up at the end of the year and say, oh, well, we're short. So it would be interesting to, from yourself and the rest of the leadership, to see sort of a strategy on how we're going to actually implement the FTEs.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's crucial, you know, for the board to have a full view. You have seen elements of it before with some of our human resource reporting, but ideas that I can speak to now is we do have a very, I would say, you know, good analysis on what the process of recruitment allows us to do now, what the attrition level is as applicants come into our view and into our system, and where the drop-off points are. It's quite staggering. I think the last conversation we've had is we're looking at approximately 20 applicants for one viable applicant through our system. You know, so it's a method of just doing the math from that perspective. But just a couple comments at this point, because I think it's crucial for the board to hear, is we're entering into a very competitive space, you know, across all industries, looking for talent. But we need to pivot from just hoping that people are going to come to our doorstep to not only outreach, but actually cultivation, which is a multi-year investment plan on dealing with youth, dealing with young people earlier within their lives and their careers, focusing on institutions that can funnel viable applicants to us, other employers that can funnel applicants to us. So youth engagement, some additional investments in human resources from an outreach standpoint are required. And we've made some good inroads towards the tail end of this year that we hope to continue. And to your point, that we hope to we will come back with a plan that shows all of our efforts. And really, this is a total service effort, you know, for us to bring in the next generation of officers and the sworn and civilian members that we need right now. We all need to be focused on the best efforts available to bring people in the door.
I appreciate that. And, you know, I think we all understand the difficult time it is right now in trying to find talent and attract talent. And as I think Chair Redmond has said in the past, it's not a job. If you're on the service, it's a vocation, and trying to find those people is probably even more challenging. So I appreciate the efforts.
Thanks, Tony. Karen Schnarr.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for this, for the package and for the presentation. I'll be honest, a little different than what I was expecting to be seeing and reading today, just in terms of how how it's all presented. And so if I understand, so last year when we were doing budget and talking about staffing and staffing needs, I think we all recognized last year that when, you know, we felt strongly as a board that we needed, 35 new sworn officers, that we also acknowledged at the time that we would be looking for about 20 new officers in the following year. And if I read your recommendation correctly, the difference is, because scenario 3 is essentially that for 2023. The difference is that you are also making recommendations for out years. So for 2020, so similar staffing levels, if I understand how the 19, because the chart doesn't tell me staffing levels or proposed staffing levels for 2024, 2025. So approximately in scenario 3, the same staffing increase for 2024, 2025, which is a little bit different than how we've thought about operating budget. I mean, capital, certainly we think big, long, 10-year, multi-year platforms, but I don't think, and other members of the board can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think for operating from a FTE perspective, we've generally thought about it sort of year by year. We haven't thought additional years. So if, so from this package, what I take it is you'll be making a recommendation, a formal recommendation to the board in January, if we make, provide some direction related to FTEs, that it's not just a 1 year commitment. We're looking at a 3-year commitment, and the scenarios here are all for ultimately the same number of FTEs, which is 55. It's just allocated in a slightly different way. And so to Tony and Sandy's, to their points, it's not that you're not going to get some of those other things. It's just that instead of getting everything immediately in terms of, where people can be allocated, it's going to be, in year 3 or year 2, as opposed to all in year 1. So the scenarios that you walked us through, with like what you get layered on, at the end of the day, you're going to get everything. It's just how much you're going to get immediately, how much you're going to get years 1 and 2, how much you'd get years 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. Am I articulating that correctly?
Yes, I would agree. And, I guess the most frank way I can respond is we take nothing for granted year over year, recognizing that we're recommending a plan for this year, which builds on last year, and also a plan that looks to, say, the next 2 years, which we believe are needs that will exist next year and the year after. But we also are trying to, given that we have a 1-year budget cycle at present, we take nothing for granted that the needs, and the climate next year, might not bring, more nuance in conversation. But ultimately, you are correct. We're essentially presenting you with a 3-year plan, and based on today's direction and input and great comments, we could come back in January with this broken out a little maybe easier to be digested and to see how we would plan to grow over 3 years to meet the needs of our community and the operational needs that we see before us today.
Perfect. And I apologize, I sound like a broken record here. I just want to confirm that, because I know how hard it is to recruit right now, that we'll be able to fulfill empty positions and the additional 19 that we're looking for here, because my colleagues have made comments as well where, we get it and it's, it works out in the actuals, but people that I talk to, nobody looks at actuals. Everybody is very focused on the budget and what we're passing in a budget that gets all the attention as opposed to the actuals at the end of the day.
Yes, and I'm not going to shy away from the notion this is a tall order. When we do our attrition projection for 2023, I do believe it provides an opportunity, with the regular recruitment that we do for brand new officers, but also continuing our appeal for experienced officers to join us. I do believe there's an opportunity to get there. I cannot make guarantees that we will, if approved, for an increase, be able to make the total achievement in 2023. But my appeal is that we need to, if I can put it this way, put the order in now to get all systems motivated and focused on what's before us, and that is recruiting the current and next generation of our service.
Thank you. Sandy, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, having trouble with my keys here. I wonder when we get the presentation in January, if the chart that's on page 5 of 14 could be clarified a little bit more. I'm still having trouble reading it. So for example, I'll try to explain where I'm having trouble. So for example, in scenario number 6, it shows a 55 FTE. And so I'm assuming from what you've said that 55 would all be in 2023 operating budget. And if that's the case, where are the increases coming from in 2024 and 2025? So like the numbers just aren't quite jiving with what I think you're trying to show. So I'm not sure if you can clarify that now, but at least when it comes back to us, if that could be a little more clear, that would be great.
Thank you, Mayor Sean. So clear notes for today. I might just turn to Kirsten just to maybe expand on what we tried to achieve by putting this into one chart succinctly, and some great notes on the feedback. So Kirsten.
Yeah, so you are correct. Scenario 6 did assume the 55 in year 1 and no additional FTEs in year 2 and 3. In terms of what drove the percentage increases in those last 2 years, there's contractual increases through a collective agreement. So cost of living, the frontline patrol premium is phased in over 3 years, so that increases every year. We have information as to what debt will look like into future years. There's strategies around reserve contributions. We have a new central building coming online, so factoring in those increases as well as some of the Pride approved positions, annualization for 2024. So general inflation. So that's some of the information benefit cost increases as we phase those in as well. So those are some of the factors that would increase the future years outside of FTE additions. We did try to keep with the different scenarios a bit of a level playing field. You'll notice that the 2025 operating budget numbers are the same in every scenario. And we were looking at how do we get to that 55 FTE number over the 3 years, and different scenarios as to how they could be phased in over the 3-year time horizon.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So I would have to tell you that I find this very informative, and we have, since I've ever been on this board, talked about trying to smooth out the peaks and valleys. And I think that this is a really effective way to deal with that, because if you hire a bunch of people 25, 30 years later, they're retiring and you have this huge void. So I think smoothing out those hills and valleys, despite how challenging recruiting might be in the context of all police service boards, police services right now is significant. So that really, really appeals to me. Kirsten, can you just talk a little bit about timing? Because clearly we're not going to hire everybody January 1st, 2023. So it makes sense to phase it over. But can you talk about some of the impacts on this year's budget by how the hirings were phased in for the 2022 budget?
Yeah, so direction was provided in November of last year for us to look at that 35 FTE expansion and phase it in across 2022 rather than having a full year impact within the budget. So when we came back to the board in December of last year, we did phase that in. So of the 35 FTEs, we added 18 in August and 17 in December. So what that meant is that when you look at a full year perspective of those 35 officers from a 2023 perspective, you do have that annualized amount of about 4 million. The total cost of the 35 officers was about 5 million. We had 1 year baked into this year's budget, so 4 million had to be added next year. So that unfortunately is the impact of when you phase items in from a budget perspective. The scenarios before you today assume a full year perspective. Obviously, you're correct. We won't be hiring them all on January 1st. So if directed by the board, we could look at a phased in scenario of those officers from a 2023 budget perspective, recognizing the impact that it does have on future years in terms of annualization.
Thank you very much for that. Ian, go ahead.
Just thank you, and through you, Chair Redmond, just on that point, I honestly, I've got to tell you, I do not remember that being in the recommendation that we put forward to do the phasing, because I've been on municipal budgets before. It just screws your budget up the following year, which we're finding out. So I think the one advantage it has, if you add it in and annualize it from the start of the year, is that what you'll end up having is a surplus. And you have to explain the surplus because you haven't spent the money, but it's easier to draw it back and say, well, we didn't hire 16 officers or 20 officers because we couldn't get them hired properly, versus having, and I think that the part of the smoothing, it is a smoothing technique, but it doesn't help in terms of as we move forward and can see a scenario where this is going to be multi-years to fill the backlog or the short staff aspect that we find ourselves in. So, I mean, just to be clear, I think if we're gonna, whatever we add should be annualized from January 1. It should not be phased in, regardless of whether it's a stretch to whether we think we're going to get them all hired at certain points in the year, because I think it will help us in future years identify FTEs and the equivalent budget line that goes with that, and anything that we add on top of that will be easier to digest. Because I did find this a little, I didn't realize that we had phased it in, and I may have missed that, but I don't recall that being something the board had indicated. So, but it's helpful background because it explains some of the, not confusion, but I guess the clarification that this has been helpful for me.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm finding this presentation for budget very transparent and very forthright. And so the fact that we're discussing these things at this juncture, we may make decisions as we go further down the budget route, but I think this is really, really helpful. Are there any more questions? Okay, thank you. Oh, Chief.
I don't want to, I do want to move along, but just to Mayor Shanta's question about our total complement. On page 69 of this package, it does contain some dialogue and some charts that speaks to our total service complement compared to two-tier municipalities and also single tier. So that's just the context, Mayor Shant's. Our total staffing ratio per 100,000 is 186. We've seen that slightly decline over the past 3 years, and that provides a point of comparison to our total service complement versus others. So that's available.
Thank you. I was looking for that. Thanks.
Thank you.
So, Chief, you've made it clear what your recommended number of FTEs is to grow this year, and looking after over 2 or 3 year period. Do you need further direction from the board at this juncture, or will you continue to build the budget and we'll come back in January?
Thanks, Chair. I think the board has provided some very helpful areas of focus for us to be even more clear about how this looks, how it's communicated. So looking at the dates before us, January 18th is our next board meeting, which traditionally is our last kick at the can, to seek approval. And then the date beyond that is February 1st, where we are planned to present to regional council. And then the further date beyond that for the total regional council budget is February 22nd. So with today's input, I believe we're prepared to come back in January with a clear, succinct, and hopefully effective presentation and recommendation.
And I think I can say on behalf of the board, we appreciate the fact that there is such clarity in what your recommendation is, and I don't see anybody questioning that. So we'll work through this budget process using your recommendation as a launching point. Okay, thank you, colleagues. I'm now going to go back to our regularly scheduled agenda. And there are no agenda items coming out of close. So the next agenda item is consent agenda items. These can all be approved with one motion unless somebody would like to pull something out, and then we can discuss it as a standalone. Karen Schnarr?
Thank you. I don't know if you need it, if we need them pulled out for full discussions. I had some just so for example, no, item like 7.11, I just had requests for things to be added to the work plan. Do you want, if I have things like that, would you like me to ask them to be pulled out for fuller discussions, or is it easier if I just ask the question now?
Well, technically we're supposed to pull it out, but why don't you just ask the question now in the
Okay.
spirit of expediency?
Yeah, perfect. So for item 7.7 with the Q2 intelligence notes, for some reason, I thought we had done those not in consent before. If somebody could just clarify with me if they have now moved to consent, because I remember having conversations about, I thought about intelligence notes, but perhaps I'm misremembering.
So I can say we've gone back and forth where sometimes it's been presented in open and other times closed. So today we made the election to attempt to move it through the consent agenda. We're happy to speak to it today.
It just confused me because I thought it, in a couple of things, like that and the municipal information, I thought I remember it having being in an open, and I think just going forward from a process perspective, we could just be consistent one way or the other. If it's in consent, let's even consent. If it's not in consent, let's, bring it in terms of what it looks like.
No, they're fair points. So the bridge from October to today has been a challenging one on some of the large items. Yeah. So
Totally understand that. And I think there's lots of, opportunity going forward for that. My only request, so for the work plan, I know we've talked as a board about including governance and advocacy. And I just think somewhere that just needs to be reflected in the work plan for the board, item 7.11 somewhere. Because that was the only thing I saw missing. And I don't have anything else.
It would appear Karen's frozen, I think. One of the Karens is frozen.
Karen is
Chair-
muted.
Chair Redmond looks like she's frozen, doesn't it?
She said challenges, I think, with connectivity and freezing and stuff like that throughout today. So why don't we just give it a minute and see if it rectifies.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karen Schnarr. Sandy, did you have something you wanted to pull out of the consent agenda?
I think I'll leave it for now.
Okay. I see no other speakers. Could I have a mover and a seconder to approve this consent agenda? Moved by Ian, seconded by Tony. Please indicate your support by raising your hand. That is carried. Any business arising from the minutes? Correspondence? There is none. Chief of Police reports. There is 11.10. There's none, but at 11, Chief of Police reports. 11.1 is use of force, and that's for information only.
thanks, Chair Redmond. I'm happy to welcome Superintendent Jen Davis today. Traditionally, we've had Inspector Jason Boucher provide this report. They work closely together, and he's absent today. So Superintendent Davis is well versed in this world, having been in the training sphere for different points of her career. So over to you, Jen, to speak to this report. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Chief. Thank you, Chair Redmond and members of the board. I'm not sure if I can share my own screen, or Holly, if you're going to put up the PowerPoint.
If you have it, I have it. You can go ahead. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. You just see the big slide?
Yeah.
Good to go.
Looks great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I do have the pleasure today of presenting the 2022 Q3 quarterly use of force report. Just as a bit of background for some new members that we have here today for the first time. Reportable incidents are incidents that require a use of force report either by legislation and or WRPS procedure. One reportable incident may generate several use of force reports, one for each officer that may be present on a call and may have involvement in the call. So if you're going through the report and you notice a difference sometimes between reportable incidents and the number of use of force reports, that explains that difference. So the reporting period for Q3 is July 1st to September 30th of 2022. Also, as a refresher, each use of force report is subject to 3 layers of scrutiny. So it's first approved by the member supervisor at the platoon or unit level. It's then approved by the senior leader of that unit or branch. And then it is forwarded to our use of force subject matter expert trainers in the training and education branch. On this slide, you'll see a summary of use of force occurrences in relation to overall occurrences over the third quarter. As you can see, we did have a slight increase in the number of occurrences over the third quarter. We are at 87,441 occurrences, resulting in 3,810 arrests, which is slightly down from last quarter. And that resulted in 96 use of force report incidences, which is also just slightly down from last quarter. While each of these is significant and does require some scrutiny, the numbers do remain small relative to the overall number of occurrences that we are responding to. And this is truly indicative of each of our members' ability to use appropriate intervention strategies in their daily interactions. If you look at the bottom corner, this just shows that citizen calls for service continue to drive the majority of occurrences which result in any type of use of force. The remainder is made up of events where we are either assisting other agencies, and usually that means other police agencies, our involvement in executing warrants and arrests that may result from those warrant executions, or other officer-initiated events such as maybe a traffic stop or a person stop. This slide provides an analysis of what call types result in intervention involving reportable incidents. You can see that the predominant driver continues to be dangerous weapons calls. So that is where a weapon is either believed or known to be involved in the occurrence. I do have to remind everyone, though, that just because a call is not classified as a dangerous weapon call, there could be a weapon involved. And if you do have a chance to look at Appendix C at any point, you will see that we do sometimes have interactions where maybe it is a warrant execution or maybe a domestic related call where an edge weapon or another weapon might be involved. It's just classified more appropriately under that classification. This graph shows our use of force options over Q3 in comparison to Q2. As we have said in the past, use of force reports are intended to allow for oversight of the appropriateness of officer response in any given situation. In addition, sometimes it does help us to spot trends in data over time. And one that we have consistently seen is that the introduction and use of conducted energy weapons has resulted in a sustained decline in the use of other options such as OC spray and baton. As you can see, we only had 2 uses of OC spray this quarter, no uses of baton, and only one call involving a canine that resulted in use of force report. This slide provides a breakdown of conducted energy weapon use specifically. There were a total of 71 CEW deployments in various forms, so down 20 from last quarter. Between 2019 and 2020, we did implement a change in our own procedure, which required our officers to report on CEW deployment anytime a CEW was removed from its holster in the presence of a member of the public and when there was intent to gain compliance. That is what drove a bit of an increase in the drawn only, which we continue to see year over year and quarter over quarter. The conducted energy weapon continues to demonstrate effectiveness at de-escalation, even simply through just display. And actually, starting in January of 2023, when the new use of force report rolls out through the ministry, this is actually going to be something that every police service will be reporting on moving forward. So it was an addition that was added for other services as well. Figure 5 here just is a high-level summary of injuries resulting from any involvement of use of force. We can see here that there were no minor injuries to an officer, 1 serious injury, and only 4 minor injuries to subjects. And as a reminder that anytime CEW is deployed and probes probes are strike a subject, we do call paramedic services to come and remove the probes, and that is what would be classified as the minor injuries for subject here. This is a busy slide, but since the start of 2020, the ministry implemented reporting on officer perception of subject race on use of force reports. They also provided us with race-based categories by which this is to be done. Figure 6 here is a summary of the data for the third quarter in comparison to the second quarter. We have identified challenges with using the use of force report to collect some of this data. For instance, you can see listed on the slide is officer perception of race may differ from one officer to another. It is a small data set that we're looking at. There's a lack of historical data. And also, what are we comparing the data to quarter over quarter and year over year? As such, the decision was made with the service that we would also provide raw data, and that is what we provide in Appendix C to this document. It provides a summary of the subject's perceived race in each case, how the call was originally generated, the type of occurrence, the subject's profiled behavior, along with the response of the officer, which allows us to more accurately present this information. So in conclusion, despite the frequency of interaction with members, very few, so 0.1%, reported any reportable incident. Injuries to both subject and officers remain low. Our de-escalation training has proven to be effective and continues to be the cornerstone of our officer intervention training. In 2020, we are continuing with this commitment with officer intervention and additional EDI components. And while the provincially mandated use of force report remains a valuable tool, we have identified some deficiencies that we continue to address and provide solutions for so that the information we're presenting is accurate. As I mentioned, a revised use of force reporting form has been developed by the ministry. WRPS has been very involved in providing recommendations and support for that document. It will roll out January 1st, 2023. The form significantly expands on data captured for each of these incidents, and we will see that come 2023, and especially our first quarter reporting, which will be our year-end reporting, it will include our first report containing any race-based data collection analysis. So the form starting 2023 is going to be significantly longer, and there'll be much more room for conversation and probably discussion once this information is included. We're working in partnership with Geraldine from our EDI branch, as well as Mandy for race-based data collection on ensuring accurate analysis is completed. Another commitment that we have made from the training branch is to continue working collaboratively to ensure close alignments with principles and action as outlined in both our strategic plan as well as our EDI strategic plan. And that's an ongoing commitment of the branch. That is everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A really interesting presentation. Questions or comments from the board? I guess Karen, go ahead.
I wouldn't want you to think I didn't have a comment or question, and you can.
I was just going to fill the void till you put your hand up.
Yeah, no, and it's not even a question. I just think, the reporting here, and when you pair it with the data being collected and just the really depth of work that you were doing with the intelligence notes. So I love that fact that you talked about Geraldine, you talked about Mandy, and how this is being looked at holistically in terms of data. And think, of course, there's going to be challenges because you've got small samples and things like that, but just really excellent forward-thinking work here in terms of looking at this in a, it's not one-offs. And so I just wanted to comment on that because I really heard that in your presentation today. And I certainly got that when I read through the intelligent note pieces as well, because I think there's some interesting learnings there that, we'll be able to have more discussions about in the future as well. So just wanted to say really interesting things that you're presenting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jen, I was just going to, it sounds like the ministry really leaned on the work that's been done at WRPS, and that doesn't surprise me. But it also sounds like they really expanded it. Do you have a view on if that expansion is going to be helpful, or is that going to be a whole bunch of background noise?
I think the best answer for that is there's going to need to be a lot of collaboration between units, similarly to what Karen just said. It is using the use of force report now to collect additional information that was never really the original intent, but that will be able to provide valuable information and data if it's used appropriately. So I think we recognize that there is this big connection that needs to exist between EDI and between race-based data, between training, to ensure that the information is really analyzed appropriately and used appropriately.
Super, thank you. Great answer, by the way. And that was for information, and it was very informative, so thank you very much. The next agenda item 11.2 is Ontario Transfer Payment Agreement, ALPR Technology Grant. This is on page 153 of your package. And Chief, do you want to kick this off?
Thanks, Chair Redmond. I might recommend, and this was a hindsight move, that really that this item parallels to the next one, which is the modernization project, and they are intertwined. So I might suggest that we introduce 11.3 and then come back to 11.2, because they're intertwined and really one leads to the other. So
Okay.
If you're okay with that, we would invite Superintendent Shana Morris to speak to the modernization project update, which hosts some recommendations for our program related to body-worn video, in-car cameras, video, and also the attached technology, which is the ALPR automated license plate readers. So over to you, Shane. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair Redmond. May I have permission to share my slides?
Please do. And colleagues, there's both of these agenda items have motions proposed as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. And as usual, I'll just have someone confirm that my slides are working. Great.
Looks
Thank
great.
you. Okay, so we're here again today. Thank you very much, Chair Redmond and members of the board, for having us here. We're excited to present our final results from our pilot project related to body-worn and in-car video. Just a quick recap. We are part of a bigger modernization project that involved 4 components: our body-worn and in-car video, but also our digital evidence management system, which is essentially cloud-based storage, and also part of our smartphone deployment fell under our project. Today, we are only going to be speaking about recommendations related specific to body-worn and in-car video. And for a recap for you, in 2021, the board approved for us to run a pilot, and the purpose of the pilot was to determine our feasibility and our ability to capture evidence while balancing our privacy rights for our citizens. Some of the key performance indicators that we really wanted to focus on were our community and member perceptions, administrative workloads, and also any impacts to conviction and charge rates. As you'll recall, we had 6 objectives. We really took these objectives strongly in terms of how we evaluated the pilot. The first one, we wanted to know, would the cameras enhance our police accountability? Would they give us the opportunity to capture accurate records of our interactions with the community? Would they enhance our public and also our officer safety? Would they lead to strengthening our commitment to bias-free service delivery? Would they provide improved evidence for our investigative teams here, as well as any judicial oversight, judicial systems and our oversight purposes, such as SIU? Would they allow our complaints to be resolved fairly and in a timely manner? And would they also give information on how effective our procedures and our training were? So our methodology, really quickly, is first, it really consisted of a significant portion of community consultation. We conducted a webinar early in 2021 with 3,600 participants. We also did a general survey and also a direct invitation to speak with cultural communities on their perceptions. We also looked at stakeholder consultation. That would be within our partners, community partners within the region. We surveyed our own members. We spent a lot of time on privacy impacts, which also led into our procedural development, and we also looked at workload impacts. So our pilot ran from June 1st, 2021 until just this past fall, October 31st, 2022. During that time, we deployed 118 cameras, body-worn videos, and 40 in-car videos. In total, we had 190 members trained, and that accounts for transfers, promotions, and movement of our members in and out of the divisions where the pilot took place. So our findings, firstly, for community support, we found overwhelming support favoring a formalized program for our police service. The community believes they're a good financial investment. They believe they'll enhance transparency, and they also believe they'll strengthen our commitment to bias-free policing. And more importantly, when we surveyed our community through surveys and through direct contact at the start of 2021, we did it again at the conclusion of the pilot this past fall with the assistance of our EDI team. And during that time, we found 16% of our respondents had actually interacted with the video technology. 10% weren't really sure if they had or hadn't. But the results, more importantly, showed that the support actually increased for our program as the pilot continued. And really, the results for the support, they really center around the trust and the need for us to build trust with the community, and they feel that this technology will help do that. We also looked to our criminal crown attorneys to get their feedback, and we found that the cameras were used for some early resolutions, for assessing reasonable prospects of conviction, for assessing charter arguments, and our crowns were admitting some of the footage into trial. And overall, their assessment really is a valuable tool for impaired driving and charter arguments, but we do know that certainly reviewing and vetting the video is very resource intensive for our judicial partners. And again, our provincial offenses court, fairly similar. They found it useful for capturing defendant statements, providing visual evidence of accident scenes. It is useful for them for resolution discussions. Generally, though, they're not finding that it captures evidence of the actual offense, so that's not entered into trial. And they did find that it did increase their workload, much like our criminal crown attorneys. And we spoke with Canadian Mental Health, who advised there weren't really any impacts, positive or negative, for them. Overall, for our membership, we surveyed them at the start of the pilot and once again at the end. These are some of the supports area. They do believe it'll enhance transparency, just like the community. They believe it'll help protect with public complaints, and it'll provide evidence for courts. The officers did express some concerns with privacy invasion for themselves, financial support, and they were concerned about administrative burdens. Much like the community, though, when we resurveyed the officers, the support overall for the program increased from the start to the finish. The only concern that decreased slightly was their issue with the financial support, and that's really surrounding staffing issues, which we've already spoken to in the budget report. Some of the other findings that we found that support our overall objectives were complaints. Our policing standards branch told us that truly it is the absolute best evidence. It supports our bias-free policing and our bias-free commitment because it's very objective. They found that it expedited complaints and it helped provide immediate resolution opportunities instead of having our community and our members wait around for results. It also was useful for oversight investigations. That's related to SIU by providing evidence for them. They've cited it in some of their conclusions and in their investigations, and it really has been an accurate representation of our interaction with the public. And finally, it's been useful for training and feedback. We have officers, they're required to do regular audits, and during the audits, they're using them for performance reviews. They're looking at officers' interactions. They're looking to see, do they have lawful authorities, and are they using proper de-escalation techniques? So when we look at implementing a program like this, it's important for us to also look at some important considerations. And the first one is workload and staffing. And there is a heavy administrative focus, there's no doubt, with a program such as this. And that's to support disclosure. We found that for ourselves and also for our stakeholders, like our justice system partners. Some of the solutions, though, that we will be looking to reduce our need for full-time equivalents are procedural adjustments, looking at modifying some of our disclosure process, working with our crowns, using our accommodated members, just and finding different staffing models. We'll look at to our friends in Calgary Police who are using hybrid options where they're using a mix of officers and a digital disclosure team to complete the work. And there's always opportunity for automation with some of the new technology like transcription and automatic redaction applications. Some of our other considerations, which you'll hear next now, is our ALPR grant. That's the provincial grant that's given us an opportunity to take full cost recovery, provide ALPR units for our vehicles, and for full cost recovery, flip them into in-car video at no additional cost. And at the same time, the OPP in the province has completed an RFP that will help secure vendors. Integration is a huge piece for us when we're modernizing and looking to integrate more technology. There's a huge significant financial and workload savings for us. When we use an integrated solution, it reduces our need for coordination, administrative support, and in any investments in extra infrastructure to bridge all the platforms together. It really reduces the amount of work that we have ahead of us. It also helps minimize the movement of private information across multiple systems. And the fact that we already have a provincial-wide DEMS program and now hopefully a provincial-wide ALPR expansion that are with Axon, it further validates our need for integrative software. And finally, another consideration is procurement. And recommending a negotiated purchase arrangement with Axon will give savings related to integration that I just spoke to, but also allows us to access piggyback clauses that have already been developed by other services contracts. And that will give us cooperative purchasing procurement abilities. So our recommendations, we have 5 for you today. The first one is we're recommending the board implement a permanent in-car video program and that we would transition all future ALPR units into in-car video systems region-wide. And that would come at a cost of about $160,000. Our second recommendation is to implement a permanent body-worn video program. We're recommending a staggered rollout over several years. That would go from 2022 to 2025 and would involve a slow movement of introducing the technology through each of the divisions. That would end up resulting in approximately 420 units with a capital cost of $644,000. Our third recommendation is approval for purchase by negotiation, and that would give our Chief Purchasing Officer the authorization to enter into negotiation directly with Axon for to acquire our body-worn and in-car video technology, and also provide an estimate of an upset limit to the Chief Purchasing Officer as well. Number 4, we're looking for approval to enter into the agreements. And of course, subject to them being within budget and to the satisfaction of the board solicitor. And then finally, number 5, we're looking for approval for negotiation increase. And that's really just to give the Chief Purchasing Officer the ability to increase the negotiation purchase beyond the price for any future expansion in staffing. We have compiled a chart here for you for our capital costs. It has been detailed further in the report, and certainly we also have broken that out into the operating costs. These operating costs are aligned with our projections from our recommendation on body-worn to stagger our deployment out over several years. And some of the costs that you'll see that are included in this operational chart include not only our FTE component, but also pieces such as our data costs year over year, warranties, storage, auto tagging, and those features. So I'll leave it at that for any questions from anyone, for myself or Kirsten for the financials. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great report. Very appreciative that you've taken the approach of staggering it rather than bringing it all in one budget year. Chief, should we deal with this 5-part motion now, and then we'll deal with the transfer payment agreement second?
Yeah, I imagine that board members may have some questions about the components. I'll just take the opportunity just to thank Shana Morris and the entire team. It's a large team that's brought this together over over a couple of years, really, to date, that we have decision points to make. And we just want to acknowledge the work that's gone in through information technology and all of our operational teams and beyond, just to bring it to date. And I do agree, Chair Redmond, that but my comment is I think that we are taking a very prudent approach to this proposed deployment for body worn, so that we can move slowly towards what will be a fully modernized future, but in a way that's sustainable from a staffing and technology standpoint.
Thank you so much for those comments. Karen Schnarr.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm, and I think this is what I heard you say, and I just wanted to confirm it. So for recommendation number 1, we're talking about the 100 units, correct? For the ALPR unit? I thought that was the case, and it said, like permanent and kind of futuristic, and I thought, no, I'm pretty positive that we were talking about the 100 and it wasn't, 100 plus stuff in the future.
That is correct. We have 120 vehicles. We're looking to outfit 100 of them for the 162. Perfect. Yes.
Perfect. That's fantastic. And I just wanted to say, because I read through this package and this has not been an easy journey for this unit in terms of doing this and thinking this through. And we as a board, and I take some responsibility for really pushed back hard to make to make sure the thinking was done, because this is something that is net new. And I thought you did a really fantastic job of hearing the board and responding. Great stuff in terms of the community engagement piece, both the general public and specific communities after the pilot was done. And so I really wanted to commend you, Superintendent Morris, for really listening to the board, taking our concerns very seriously, and then acting and coming back to us with this additional information. And so, I know we're going through questions at the appropriate time. I would be delighted to move the motion to make this a permanent project.
Okay, moved by Karen. Do I have a seconder? Okay, Doug. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I have one question, just more for clarity. The item number 5, the recommendation that the board authorize the chief purchasing officer, provided the increases are within budget. Can you just give a little bit more clarity within budget what that really means? Because I like dollar amounts, or what budget are you talking about? So just more for clarity.
Chief, do you want Kirsten to answer this?
I always want Kirsten to answer. Go ahead.
Great.
So we do have, all the costs within the report are based upon volumes, based upon our officers at this point that we have. But recognizing that we're having discussions through budget about potentially adding officers into the future, we don't want to have to come back to the board every time we need to purchase additional body worn units to support additional officers that may be approved by the board through future budget processes. So it allows us that ability, kind of like in a procurement bylaw where the procurement process is governed when you purchase initial software, but then ongoing maintenance doesn't have to keep coming back to the board. It's the same concept.
Okay, and this relates just to the expansion of new officers and equipment for those officers. It is not for enhancements or anything along the.
Yeah, so agreed. So if you were to agree to add sworn officer positions that need a body worn video, then I would add that to the budget through the budget process, but I'd be authorized to proceed and get that equipment rather than having to come back to the board every time.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I see no further questions. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate. That is carried. That is great. And now we will go back to 11.2, automated license plate recognition technology grant. And Chief, I've got you and Gary speaking to this.
Thank you, Chair Redmond. Yes, I'm just trying to find it in my agenda as well. So this is the complementary piece, which is really just the contractual component of us acquiring through the grant process and the contract with the ministry, the equipment and the contract. So Gary, I can turn it over to you just to speak to the logistics of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and good morning, Board. Yes, Very, very briefly on this. This is a good news story. With the advent of the ALPR grant, as Superintendent Morris identified in her presentation, it offset a great number of the costs that we would otherwise have. They were concurrent together. One relied on the other, but I will tell you that had you not approve the modernization, we'd likely be still pushing for this grant because it is a useful technology as it relates to reading license plates with the removal of the sticker renewal processes. This was the province's initiative to assist police boards and services in that regard, and it has that operational benefit of being an in-car video as well. So it certainly matches in with the direction that staff was going to recommend regardless. And then obviously as part of the modernization. With respect to the grants are often not something that we overly publicize until the province has. The province has. And there have been other boards that have already approved this. It's a standard funding agreement that has been provided and reviewed by myself and then your solicitor, Jeff Schelling. They are literally almost a cut and paste except for the schedules that set out the amounts. And we will, of course, abide by all the requirements in the agreement as it relates to reporting to the province, et cetera, as noted in the report. So we highly recommend that you approve this wonderful influx of almost $1.8 million of funding.
That's terrific. This is a one-time funding grant, and it is just short of 1.8 million. I see no questions. I think we should all just do a little woohoo because it's always nice to get good news of that magnitude at this juncture when we're looking at the budget. Do I have a mover? Moved by Sandy, seconded by Tony. No further discussion. All those in favor, please indicate your support. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So for information, 11.4 is the 2022-204 variance update Q3. This is for information. And Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
And again, I'm happy to turn this one over to Kirsten Hand. This will be a brief report and presentation on her part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just for clarification, sorry, am I sharing my presentation or? Okay, I think, okay.
You can go ahead, Kirsten.
Okay. Okay, let me just.
Looks good.
Oh, it did? Oh, sorry.
No, it did look good. Now it disappeared.
Okay. All righty. There. Okay. I think I'm good now.
Yeah.
All right. This will be quick. So before you today is the September financial variance results. First, I'll talk to operating budget. So September year to date, we were under budget by just over $3 million. We did do a forecast to the end of the year, and at this point, we're anticipating approximately $1 million surplus, which would represent 0.5% of the total budget. Just to note, we did assume a couple things within that forecast. First of all, as you recall, within the 2022 budget, we assumed that we would pull some money from reserves and prior year budget surplus. Given that we are forecasting a surplus, we did not assume that we would pull on those reserves. And second of all, when we did our annual reserve report, the board had provided direction at that point that we should look at utilizing any surpluses that we may see through our sick leave payment budget versus actuals and assign those savings to the reserve to further mitigate the unfunded situation we were in. So we've assumed that within the forecast as well. Over 90% of our operating budget is people. So we always report upon where we're at compared to authorized. Authorized means budget. So we look at where we're at for both a sworn and civilian component. So as you'll note, at the end of September, we were under budget, which means we see savings or we have vacancies. We also note in the report that 17 of the 35 sworn officers are not added to the budget until December. So that authorized or budget number goes up, which means that we will see more vacancies as of December. So those vacancies contribute towards savings in our budget. Because we're below budgeted levels. As well, we do have seen maternity and paternity leaves that has also created savings towards our budget, because on the sworn side, we can't backfill mat and pat leaves like we can on the civilian side through temporary contracts. Just a quick touch upon some of the variances explained in the report. From over budget year-to-date perspective, we are over in areas such as overtime, benefits, WSIB, health and dental, and also we're anticipating a surplus in our voice radio cost recovery model, and through our draft MOU with our voice radio agencies, that money goes to a reserve. So that is assumed within the year-to-date results. And then under budget year-to-date is we're not paying out as many sick leave payments as we thought to eligible members. We're seeing lower expenses in training and travel, and in some of our program-related areas in our service line. From a revenue perspective, we see some areas being over budget on some of our cost recovery, which again would be offset by an expense, so no impact to the bottom line. As reported earlier this year, our community safety and policing grant was greater than what we had assumed in the budget. We saw increases in that, so we continue to see that favorability. And from an under budget perspective to date, we continue to see lower volumes of paid duty, which impacts our revenue and again, our compensation line. So net impact to the bottom line is close to zero. From a capital perspective, October 14th year to date, we've spent 49% of our budget. The forecast at this point looks like we'll spend up to 74% of our budget with carry forward to the next year, which was incorporated in the budget report. And at this point, we anticipate to see savings of just over $1 million of budget that we don't expect that we will require. From a fleet perspective, we've replaced 33 vehicles to date. We expect to, or we've put orders into order 3 for our 35 sworn expansion that's funded through growth funding, so RDC funding. In addition to that, through the budget process, we also communicated we need to purchase an additional 6 vehicles. So that's 9 in total for the 35 sworn addition assumed in 2022 budget. From an IT perspective, some of the major projects there are automated asset and evidence management solution, which is first going into New Central, business intelligence tools, the human resource information systems project, body worn and in-car video, next generation 911, which is technology for our communication center as mandated by the CRTC. And from a facilities perspective, our 2 major projects where we saw expenditures were the window replacement project for North Division from the initial creation of that building. And lastly, our new central building at 200 Frederick Street, which is expected to be completed in the spring of next year. So that summarizes a quick overview of our September variance results. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, very informative and record speed. I see no questions. This is really good information to have and monitor as we go along. So thank you, Kirsten. I see no questions, and Chief, good ploy to kick that over to Kirsten. The next agenda item is monthly Chief of Police report verbal. So over to you, Chief.
Thanks, Chair Redmond. And I won't take long here, but just want to recognize phenomenal work from our members since we last reported. Just a number of incredible investigations dealing with issues that we've spoken to today, our violent crime response, robbery, stabbings, and so on, that continue to be a concern to our community. Just want to acknowledge all of our members that are contributing to that great work. There is one widely reported investigation series of investigations that our service took on called Project Maverick. It was featured prominently in the local media. We just want to acknowledge to the board incredible work from our cybercrime, internet child exploitation team, and our direct action response team. who executed 7 search warrants, arrested 4 males, 1 female, and even led through their investigative efforts to an arrest of somebody in the United Kingdom. Locally, our investigators laid 20 criminal charges related to child exploitation and safeguarded 4 children through local investigations. And this was part of a provincial initiative focusing on the incredible work that all of our police services are committed to in tackling online exploitation and the cyber neighborhood that continues to pose complexities. So I want to acknowledge that for the board. Also, just want to acknowledge a couple points of interest. Last week, we were very proud to be at the Ontario Police College for the swearing in of about 460 officers across the province. I'm proud to welcome our members back. They'll be featured in a badge ceremony on January 6th, so we look forward to that happy occasion. And we're looking to send some new members down in January as well. Also, just want to feature a couple things in closing. We have been out in the community since November 17th, conducting our annual RIDE program, our checks on sobriety and impaired driving. And our measures to date have been pretty, incredible. We've checked almost 4,000 vehicles to this point. We've laid a number of charges related to impaired driving and roadside screening suspensions and other provincial offenses. So it's very important as we head into the holiday season, whether it be parties, happy occasions to celebrate, that we remind the community that road safety is among our #1 priorities. And we hope everyone is safe, healthy, and happy holiday. And to our members out there, we commend them for their efforts on road safety. And in closing, having been around this past weekend to various locations across the region, our Stuff a Cruiser campaign was very successful. Very proud to see primarily our auxiliary officers who were making a broad appeal to the community for generosity to deal with the annual campaign to bring toys to those in need across our community. And we in total collected about 4,000 toys that will go to the Knights of Columbus to be circulated throughout the region in the coming year. So that was a really happy occasion. And as a very proud chief, it was just incredible to see the dedication of not only our members from the auxiliary front, but also the community's generosity. Was just overwhelming to see people give of themselves and to this great cause. So in closing, welcome to our 2 new board members. Look forward to robust and conversations in the future, and for you joining the cause of accountability and governance in our region, and to the entire board and to our service, wishing everyone well for a safe, happy holiday, and look forward to a promising and prosperous new year. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. And yes, we've crossed paths several times over the past couple of weeks, and you've been a wonderful force of good, whether we're running up and down grocery aisles, gathering in a competition, gathering groceries for the food bank, or a reading in Preston that was done of Dickens' Christmas Carol to get donations for the food bank. So great community spirit and wonderful time of year to tap into all the goodwill. Next agenda item is new business. Is there any new business? Future agenda items. The only information item I have is that once we are adjourned, members of the media are welcome to stay on this call. And I believe Sherry Greeno will take over fielding questions for the chief and I, if you have any. So on that note, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Doug, seconded by Sandy. All those in favor? Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.